I've lived in my current apartment for almost 3 years now. It's nothing special, just a cramped one-bedroom on the third floor of a brick building that looks like it was thrown together in the 70s and never updated since. The paint on the hallways is chipped, the elevators always smell like piss, and half the lights in the stairwell flicker as if the building itself is trying to warn us not to stay too long. But the rent is cheap, and in this city, cheap rent is like winning the lottery. The walls are thin, though, so thin that I can hear my neighbor cough, sneeze, or yell at whatever game he's losing on his TV. His name's Frank, or at least, that's what I think. I never actually introduced myself, but I overheard his name one night when someone knocked on his door looking for him. He's in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, always wears a stained undershirt when I see him in the hallway. Honestly, he always gave me weird vibes, the kind of man you don't make eye contact with when you're both fumbling for your keys. For the longest time, the worst thing about living next to him was the noise. He'd stay up late at night stomping around, slamming cabinets or mumbling to himself. I figured he was just drunk most nights, but there was something about his mumbling that always sounded wrong, like he was talking to someone or something. Sometimes I pressed my ear to the wall just to hear, and it didn't sound like a phone call. There would be long stretches of silence followed by whispers so low I couldn't make out the words. At first, I laughed it off. Big city apartments, thin walls, eccentric neighbors, it comes with the territory. But then things started happening that I couldn't just brush off. It began with the scratching. Late one night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. At first, I thought it was just Frank's TV or maybe a mouse in the walls, but the noise was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across drywall. The sound wasn't coming from the ceiling or floor. It was coming directly from the wall beside my bed, the one that connected to Frank's apartment. I sat up, turned off my phone, and just listened. The scratching would stop for a few seconds, then resume, sometimes slow, sometimes frantic, like someone was trying to get my attention. I banged on the wall and shouted, "Hey, cut it out." The scratching stopped immediately. I figured that was the end of it, but about 5 minutes later, I heard something else. Not scratching, not stopping, not mumbling. It was a whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but I swear on my life I heard it. A voice right up against the wall, whispering my name, "Daniel." My blood went cold. I never told Frank my name. I didn't even know if he knew who I was. I stayed awake until sunrise that night, every creak and groan of the building making me jump. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, I told myself it had to be a dream. Maybe I was half asleep, maybe I misheard. That's what I told myself until it happened again and again. For the next 2 weeks, almost every night, I would hear the whispers through the wall. Sometimes it was my name. Sometimes it was just incoherent muttering. Sometimes it was laughter, low, raspy chuckles that made my skin crawl. I tried everything to block it out. Earplugs, blasting white noise, even sleeping on the couch, but nothing helped. One night, I snapped. It was 2 a.m., and I'd been lying in bed listening to Frank's low, guttural whispers for what felt like an eternity. I jumped up, stormed out of my apartment, and pounded on his door. "Frank, what the hell is your problem?" I shouted. No answer. I pounded again, harder this time. "Cut the shit or I'm calling the landlord." Silence. I pressed my ear to the door, expecting to hear footsteps or breathing or something, but there was nothing. His apartment was completely silent. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes before giving up and going back inside. I half expected him to start again the moment I closed my door, but instead I heard movement, not from Frank's apartment, from inside my walls. At first it was faint, like a shuffling sound, dragging across the space behind the drywall. My stomach dropped. Rats, I thought. Has to be rats. But the sound grew louder, heavier, too heavy for rats. It sounded like something was crawling. Scratch, drag, scratch, drag. It traveled along the length of the wall, moving from the bedroom toward the living room. I followed it, my heart slamming in my chest until I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment. The sound stopped, and then 3 slow knocks echoed from inside the wall. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to the landlord. I told him there was something living in the walls. Rats, raccoons, whatever. He gave me a look like I was crazy, but promised he'd send maintenance to check it out. A few days later, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was from the landlord. No sign of pests, nothing in the walls. I wanted to believe him, but that night the whispers came back, louder than ever. This time they weren't muffled by drywall. They were in my apartment. I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not my own. Deep, ragged breaths inches from my ear. I jolted upright, fumbling for the lamp, but when the light flooded the room, no one was there. The whispers, though, they hadn't stopped. They were coming from the closet. I stared at the door, too terrified to move. My phone was on the nightstand, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even grab it. The whispers grew more urgent, more frantic, until finally I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed, threw open the closet door, and nothing, empty. Just a few shirts and boxes. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. At the back of the closet, behind one of the boxes, was a small square cutout in the wall. A vent. Except it wasn't connected to any ductwork. It was just an opening, and it looked directly into Frank's apartment. I swear I almost vomited when I saw it. The vent was just big enough for someone to press their face against it. To watch, to whisper, to scratch. I shoved the box back in front of the hole and didn't sleep for 2 days. When I finally worked up the nerve to confront Frank again, his apartment was empty, completely empty. Door unlocked, blinds drawn, no furniture. It was like he vanished overnight. I asked the landlord what happened, and he swore nobody named Frank ever lived there. But I know what I saw, and last night, when I was trying to convince myself it was all over, I heard it again, scratch, drag inside my walls. And this time, the whisper wasn't just my name, it said, "I found you." I used to think the worst kind of neighbors were the noisy ones. The ones who threw late-night parties, blasted music through paper-thin walls, or let their dogs bark endlessly. But I was wrong. Noise is nothing. You can drown out noise. What you can't drown out is the feeling of being watched. When I moved into my new house 2 years ago, I was ecstatic. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest one-story home in a quiet neighborhood tucked on the edge of town. After years of cramped apartments, it finally felt like I had space to breathe. The house had a little fenced yard, a big oak tree out front, and my favorite feature, giant living room windows that let in the morning sun. Those windows, though, are the reason I haven't slept properly in months. My neighbors across the street were a strange pair, an elderly woman and I assume her adult daughter. The older woman, I'll call her Martha, looked to be in her late 60s, maybe 70s. Always wore the same faded blue cardigan, her gray hair tied back in a bun so tight it looked painful. Her daughter, I never caught her name, was younger, maybe mid-30s, but she wasn't right. She always stood hunched, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, rocking back and forth. Sometimes she'd scream, other times she'd laugh at nothing. At first I felt sorry for them. They never had visitors, never left the house except to collect mail or drag their trash cans to the curb. I figured life dealt them a rough hand, but sympathy curdled into unease the very first week I moved in. Because every night without fail, when I closed my curtains before bed, I would see them standing in their window, watching me. The first time I thought it was coincidence. I happened to glance out and there they were, silhouettes framed by their living room light staring straight across the street into my house. I quickly pulled the curtains shut, telling myself it was just one of those awkward neighbor things. Maybe they were curious about the new guy. But the second night they were there again, both of them side by side, unmoving, watching. By the end of the first week, it wasn't a coincidence anymore. I tried waving once, to break the ice. Their response? Nothing. They didn't smile, didn't wave back, just stood there blank-faced. The younger one rocking slightly, the older one gripping her arm as if holding her in place. It got to the point where I stopped opening my curtains altogether. I didn't want to see them. Didn't want to know if they were watching. But even with the curtains closed, I couldn't shake the feeling of their eyes boring into my house. And then the noises started. The first night, I woke to a faint tapping. Not the usual creaks and groans of a settling house. No, this was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to pinpoint the source. It was coming from the living room. When I crept out, phone light trembling in my hand, I realized the sound was coming from the front window. I pulled back the curtain an inch, and my stomach dropped. The younger woman was standing in my yard, right up against the glass. Her pale face was inches from mine, lips stretched in a crooked grin. One finger tapped the window rhythmically in perfect time with my racing heart. I screamed and stumbled back, fumbling for the light switch. When the lamp flicked on, she was gone. Just like that. The yard was empty. I barely slept that night, too afraid she'd come back. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a nightmare. Stress, moving anxiety, maybe even sleep paralysis. Anything but real. But the second night, I woke to the sound again. Tap, tap, tap. This time I didn't check. I stayed in bed, clutching the covers to my chest, praying it would stop. Eventually it did. But the next morning when I went to get the mail, I saw it. A single handprint smeared across my window, smaller than mine. Too small to be Martha's, but just right for her daughter. I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? My neighbor's mentally ill daughter stood in my yard and scared me. I pictured the cops rolling their eyes, telling me to lock my doors and mind my business. Besides, she hadn't actually broken in. Not yet, so I did nothing. But they knew I did nothing because the next night, I woke to something worse, not tapping, whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through a crack in the windowsill. But as I lay still, holding my breath, the words grew clearer. Come outside. I froze. Come play with us. It was her voice. The younger one. High-pitched, sing-song, childish. I shot out of bed, too terrified to think, and ran to the window. My yard was empty, but across the street their window glowed. And there they were again, Martha and her daughter standing in the frame, watching. Only this time the daughter was grinning ear to ear, her lips moving. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew she was the one whispering. I yanked the curtain shut and didn't open them again for days. I thought maybe if I ignored them long enough they'd get bored. But instead, things escalated. I started finding things on my porch. A child's doll with its eyes gouged out. A dead bird, wings twisted, neck snapped. Once an old Polaroid picture of my house taken from their yard. I finally broke and called the cops. They came out, took my statement, even knocked on Martha's door. But when she answered, she looked frail, harmless, confused. She denied everything, said they hadn't left the house in days. The cops gave me a polite smile, a half-assed warning to call us if anything else happens, and left. That night I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of faces at the window. The real horror came 2 weeks later. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. Every hair on my body stood up. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept into the hall. The house was pitch black, silent, but the air felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. As I stepped into the living room, I heard it, that same sing-song whisper, "We're inside now." I swung the bat wildly, my breath ragged, but I hit nothing. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep hold of the bat. I flicked on the light and saw my front door wide open. No one there. I ran outside in a panic, half expecting to see them in the yard. Instead, I saw their house, dark, silent, curtains drawn except the window. The younger woman's face was pressed to the glass, teeth bared in a grotesque smile. Her eyes locked onto mine as Martha stood behind her, whispering something into her ear. I slammed my door shut and called the cops again. This time, I begged them. Told them I wasn't safe. They promised to send a car, but no one came. Or if they did, they never stopped at my house. The next day, I decided to install security cameras. I needed proof. Something tangible to show the cops, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I sat in bed watching the feed on my phone, every muscle tense. Midnight passed, nothing. 1 a.m., nothing. By 2, my eyelids grew heavy. I must have dozed off because when I woke, it was nearly 4, and my phone was buzzing with motion alerts. I opened the app and nearly dropped the phone. They were inside my house. Both of them, Martha and her daughter, standing in the living room, staring straight into the camera. The feed crackled, glitching, but their faces were clear enough. The younger one tilted her head, smiling that same crooked grin. Martha raised a finger to her lips. Shh! I bolted out of bed, grabbed the bat, and tore through the house. But when I got to the living room, it was empty. No one, the door was locked. Windows shut. The cameras didn't lie, though. I replayed the footage over and over until dawn, and every time there they were, standing inside my house, watching. I moved out the next week, but even now in my new place, I keep the curtains closed because sometimes late at night, I swear I hear it again, tap, tap, tap on the window. When I first rented the house on Greenbrier Lane, I thought I'd lucked out. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and the landlord desperate enough to cut me a deal if I promised to stay at least a year. The only catch, he told me with a shrug, was the neighbor, old man next door's. Different, he said, scratching his neck. Keeps to himself mostly. Don't bother him and he won't bother you. I laughed it off. I'd dealt with loud college kids, angry drunks, and nosy landlords before. What's one different old man compared to that? But it didn't take long to see what he meant. The first night I moved in, I was hauling boxes out of my car when I saw him. He stood in the shadows of his porch, just watching me. No hello, no wave, no neighborly smile. Just two pale eyes in the dark tracking me as I carried my life inside. I raised a hand, called out a polite evening, but he didn't answer. Just turned and slipped back into his house like I hadn't spoken at all. That should have been my first red flag. Over the next few weeks, I noticed strange things. The old man rarely came outside except late at night. Sometimes I'd catch him shuffling down the driveway at 2 or 3 in the morning, dragging a heavy black trash bag toward his garage. The bag would leave a dark streak on the pavement, like something wet was leaking out. Other nights, I'd hear noises through the thin walls of my bedroom. Not TV, not music, more like hammering, sawing. Once, I swear I heard muffled screaming. I told myself it was just the house settling or my imagination, or maybe the guy was a woodworker, but then came the smell. It started faint, like raw meat left out too long, then stronger, sickly sweet, clinging to the summer air, seeping into my windows no matter how tightly I shut them. I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, rehearsing something casual. "Hey neighbor, everything okay?" But when the door creaked open, the words died in my throat. The old man stood there in stained overalls, his face lined like cracked leather, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, I glimpsed the dark interior of his house. The air that wafted out was worse than the smell outside, rotten, metallic, choking. "Yes?" he rasped. I stammered. Sorry, I just wanted to check if everything's all right. I've been noticing. Smells." His lips peeled back into something between a smile and a grimace. "Basement work," he said flatly. "Old pipes. Don't worry yourself." Before I could respond, he shut the door. Basement work. The problem was, my house didn't have a basement, and according to the listing, neither did his. That night, the noises got worse. Thuds scraping, chains rattling, and underneath it all, something else. A sound that made my blood run cold. Crying. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart hammering, and I could hear it. Soft, broken sobs, rising up from the ground. From beneath his house. There was no way I could ignore it anymore. The next day, I tried asking around the neighborhood. Most people kept their answers vague, uncomfortable. Some said the old man had lived there forever, since before the street was even paved. Others swore he used to be a butcher. One woman told me her cat disappeared last year, and she heard meowing from his garage for weeks after. The more I heard, the more I felt sick. I decided to do something reckless. That night, around midnight, I crept outside with a flashlight. His house was dark, silent, no sign of movement. I circled around back, careful not to crunch the gravel too loud under my shoes. That's when I saw it. A door, set into the ground like a storm cellar, half hidden behind overgrown weeds and a stack of firewood. 2 heavy metal doors with a padlock the size of my fist. I crouched down, shining my light along the edges. Rust, dirt, and, God help me, stains. Dark stains soaking into the soil around the threshold. I felt bile rise in my throat. I wanted to run, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But then I heard it, a voice so faint I thought I imagined it. "Help me." I froze. The sound came from below, through the locked doors. A weak, desperate whisper, "Please, someone." My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. I wanted to shout, to break the lock, to do anything, but I didn't, I couldn't. Because in that moment, I heard another sound. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps creaking across the floorboards inside the old man's house. Moving toward the back door, I bolted. Ran through my yard, slammed my own door shut, locked every window. I didn't sleep at all that night, jumping at every creak and shadow. The next morning, I called the police. They came out, listened to my story with polite skepticism, and reluctantly agreed to check the cellar. But when we got there, the doors were gone, not locked, not hidden, gone. The weeds had been cleared, the firewood neatly stacked, and where I swore I saw the cellar doors was nothing but smooth dirt. freshly packed. The cops gave me a look, one that said, "Are you wasting our time?" and left. I couldn't explain it, but the smell only grew stronger. For the next week, I barely left my house. Every time I looked out the window, I'd see him standing in his yard staring at me. No expression, just waiting. And at night, the noises continued. The cries, the whispers, the chains. One night, I woke to something worse. A sound inside my house. The creak of my basement door. Except, I don't have a basement. I crept into the hall, bat in hand, and saw it. A door that hadn't been there before. Set into the floor at the end of the hallway. Old wood, iron hinges reeking of rot, and from below, faint but clear, "Help me." My hands went numb. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering to myself that it wasn't real. But the door was real. Solid. Waiting. And as I stood there paralyzed, I heard something else. The old man's voice. "Told you not to worry yourself." The voice came from below, from the dark. That's when the door creaked open.